Under the blistering sun of the old American frontier, the air shimmered with heat, and the scent of dust hung heavy across the open plain. A lone wagon creaked forward along a rugged trail, its wooden wheels groaning as it carried the faint echoes of human pain and endurance. Inside that wagon lay a young woman, her back marked by the cruelty of those who had seen her as less than human, her strength tested beyond measure. She had been whipped until her body gave out, punished not for what she did, but for what she refused to become a symbol of defiance in a world ruled by fear and pride. The land stretched endlessly, harsh and beautiful, painted in tones of red and gold. It was a land where men fought for honor, tribes guarded their freedom, and the wind carried stories of vengeance and mercy alike. In this world, survival demanded not just strength but heart, and sometimes the courage to stand against one's own people. On that day, as the shadows of late afternoon crept over the rocks, an Apache warrior rode toward the wagon trail. His long hair caught the wind, his dark eyes held a storm that no man could tame. He had seen many cruelties, blood spilled for pride, love crushed by duty, but what he saw that day tore something deep inside him. The woman lay motionless near the wagon, her wrists raw from rope, her dress torn, her breathing shallow. The men who had done it were gone, riding off with the satisfaction of power, leaving her to die under the open sky. The warrior's chest tightened as he looked at her. She was not of his people, not of his world. Yet the sight of her suffering felt personal, as if fate itself had placed her in his path for a reason he could not yet name. He dismounted slowly, his moccasins sinking into the warm sand. The soft jingle of his necklace, the sound of carved bone and silver, was the only thing that broke the silence. He knelt beside her, brushing the dust from her face. Her eyes fluttered open, pale and frightened, and for a moment their gazes met. She expected another blow, another cruel hand. Instead, she found gentleness. His voice was quiet, deep, carrying the rhythm of the desert. He told her to breathe, that she was safe now. Though his own tribe would have said otherwise, to his people, she was an outsider, a settler woman, a symbol of the encroaching world that threatened their way of life. Helping her meant betrayal, defiance, and punishment. Yet something in him refused to walk away. There had been enough hate in his lifetime, enough scars carved by revenge. He could not let this one die here, not when her spirit still burned faintly beneath the pain. He lifted her carefully, his strong arms steady as he carried her toward his horse. Every step echoed with the sound of rebellion. In the distance, the sun bled into the horizon, turning the desert sky into a firestorm of color. It was a dangerous beauty, one that mirrored the choice he was making. He knew the price of mercy. If his tribe found out, they would brand him a traitor, strip him of his honor, maybe even his life. But he had made his choice. She whispered faintly, asking why. Why would a man who should have hated her come to her rescue? He didn't answer. Some truths didn't need words. He only told her to hold on as he lifted her onto his horse. The mare snorted softly, uneasy, as if it too sensed the storm ahead. With one last glance at the abandoned wagon, he turned toward the distant mountains where the sun dipped low, and rode into the gathering dusk. That night, as the desert cooled and the stars appeared like silver fire, the warrior built a small fire in a hollow between two cliffs. The woman lay wrapped in a blanket, trembling from fever and exhaustion. He washed her wounds with water from his canteen, each movement careful and deliberate. The flicker of firelight danced across his face, strong, proud, and troubled. He had always believed that destiny was written in the wind and the dust, but now he wasn't so sure. Maybe fate could be rewritten by the courage to do what was right. The sound of distant drums carried faintly through the night, the rhythm of his tribe preparing for the next hunt, or perhaps a war council. Each beat reminded him that he was now walking a thin line between loyalty and compassion. The woman stirred, whispering again, and he hushed her softly. Her skin burned with fever, but her spirit, he sensed, was far from broken. She clutched a small pendant in her hand, a keepsake, maybe of a lost family or a forgotten home. He didn't ask. Some sorrows were better left unspoken. As the firelight dimmed, his thoughts drifted back to his people. They had suffered much, seen their lands taken, and their promises broken. The bitterness in their hearts had hardened them, turning mercy into weakness. But tonight, as he watched the fragile woman breathe against the desert wind, he wondered if strength could also mean compassion. By dawn, the world around them had changed. The sun rose over the red cliffs, casting long shadows that reached toward the camp. The woman woke, her voice barely a whisper, thanking him in broken words. He offered her water and turned his gaze east, toward the land where his tribe roamed. He knew they would notice his absence. They would come looking. The thought made his pulse quicken. But there was no turning back now. He helped her onto the horse again, knowing they had to move before the sun climbed too high. Each mile they rode drew him further from the life he had known, his people, his name, his honor. Yet it also drew him closer to something new, something uncertain but pure. The road ahead would be dangerous. The tribe would not forgive betrayal easily, and the white men would never understand why an Apache warrior would risk everything for a woman not his own. But none of that mattered. The only thing that mattered was keeping her alive. As they crossed the dry riverbed, silence was broken by a distant sound, a war cry carried by the wind. He turned sharply, his instincts flaring. On the ridge behind them, riders appeared, their faces painted with the colors of vengeance. His tribe had found him. The sun glinted off their spears, and in that instant, he knew the time for hiding was over. He looked at the woman beside him, her eyes wide with fear. The world seemed to pause, caught between two heartbeats. He could surrender her and save himself, or he could stand against his own people for a promise he had never spoken aloud to protect her, no matter the cost. The horse shifted restlessly beneath him, sensing his tension. The riders were closing in, their voices echoing across the valley. Dust rose around them, thick and golden, and the sky burned above like an omen. He gripped the reins tightly, his jaw set, his heart steady. The choice was made long ago, the moment he lifted her from the ground. As the first arrow whistled through the air, the warrior turned his horse toward the open desert. The woman clung to him, her strength returning in fragments of desperate hope. Behind them, the thunder of hooves grew louder. Ahead lay uncertainty, danger, and maybe death, but also freedom. The desert wind carried the cry of the pursuers and the beating of their hearts. The warrior leaned forward, urging the horse faster, knowing that this was more than a flight for survival. It was a battle between two worlds, the world of vengeance and the world of compassion. And somewhere beyond the horizon, their destiny waited, still unwritten, carried by the wind that knew no master. The horse's hooves thundered against the earth, kicking up clouds of sand as they raced through the valley. The woman clung tightly to the warrior's waist, her body weak, but her spirit refusing to give up. The desert stretched before them like a vast sea of red dust, and behind them, cries of pursuit grew fainter, but not distant enough. The warrior knew his people well. They would not stop until they had him. Defying one's tribe was not a sin easily forgiven, especially when it meant protecting an enemy. Every mile carried the weight of that decision, and though his face remained calm, his heart was heavy with conflict. When the sun began to dip, he finally slowed near a cluster of boulders where the earth broke into a narrow canyon. The horse was exhausted, foam glistening on its flanks. He helped the woman down gently, her legs trembling as they touched the ground. She looked around, frightened and unsure where they were, but too drained to ask questions. The warrior guided her to a shaded spot beneath a ledge and fetched water from a small skin pouch tied to the saddle. He offered it to her in silence, watching her drink in slow, careful sips. The quiet stretched between them, heavy and strange. She wanted to speak, to thank him again, but her throat ached, and her mind was crowded with fear. She didn't understand this man, why he had helped her, why he had risked everything. His dark eyes held no cruelty, only a deep, guarded sadness. There was strength in him, but something about that strength felt lonely, like it came from a lifetime of loss. As the evening cooled, he built a small fire, shielding it from sight with a wall of stone. Smoke curled up in thin trails that disappeared into the twilight. The woman shivered as she sat near the flames, her hands clutching the thin blanket he had given her. Her wound still stung, but it was the memories that hurt worse than the screams. The laughter of men who enjoyed her suffering, the sound of the whip cutting through the air. She tried to push it away, but it lived inside her now, a ghost that would not rest. The warrior broke the silence at last, his voice deep and low. He told her his tribe would come, that they would not stop searching for him. To them, she was a trespasser, and to him, now a reason for war. But he did not regret what he had done. He believed the Great Spirit guided him that day, though he did not yet understand why. She listened to him, barely catching the meaning of his words, yet feeling their weight. His tone carried conviction, not boastfulness. He was a man who had chosen his path, no matter the cost. Night fell slowly, and the canyon filled with shadows. Coyotes cried in the distance, their howls echoing against the stone walls. The woman's heart beat faster at every sound, but the warrior sat motionless, his back straight, his eyes scanning the horizon. He was alert, restless. The firelight flickering against the muscles of his bare chest and the necklace that hung around his neck, strands of bone, stone and silver beads, each piece holding a story. When she finally spoke, her voice trembled. She told him her family had been traveling west with a wagon train. They were settlers looking for land, for a new beginning, but trouble had found them before they could reach it. Raiders attacked one night, some from outside, some from within. In the chaos, she was taken, accused of treachery, and beaten when she tried to escape. She didn't know who lived or who died. All she remembered was the pain and the sound of her own cries swallowed by the desert wind. He listened without interrupting, its expression unreadable. When she finished, she looked at him as if expecting judgment or pity, but he gave neither. Instead, he said quietly that the land they sought to claim had belonged to his people long before any settlers came. His words were not bitter, only true. He said the earth remembered everything, the footsteps of ancestors, the blood that had been spilled, and the cries of those who had suffered. For a moment, she thought he might resent her for being one of the people who took that land, but then his tone softened. He told her not all hearts were cruel, and not all souls were meant to destroy. The fire burned low, and they sat in silence again. Two strangers caught between worlds that could never fully understand each other. Yet in that quiet, something human passed between them, a fragile connection born not from words, but from shared pain. By dawn, they were already moving again. The warrior knew they couldn't stay in one place for long. His tribe would follow the trail of hoofprints and smoke, reading the land as easily as one reads a story. The woman tried to help where she could, though her body still ached. She gathered brush, held the reins when he scouted ahead, and asked questions about the land they crossed. He told her the names his people gave to mountains and rivers, names older than memory itself. It comforted her somehow, hearing those words, as if they belonged to a world untouched by hate. As days passed, she began to see glimpses of the man beneath the warrior. He was stern, yes, but not cruel. He spoke little, but his actions spoke more. When she stumbled, he caught her arm. When the sun grew too hot, he found shade. When she cried quietly at night, thinking he was asleep, he stirred the fire a little higher to keep the darkness away. Yet for all his quiet strength, she could see the burden he carried. Every time he looked back toward the horizon, his jaw tightened. He missed his people, his home, the songs sung by the elders, the laughter of children near the fires. By saving her, he had lost them all, and she knew it. The realization filled her with guilt and gratitude in equal measure. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the desert gold, they came upon an abandoned mission. The walls were crumbling, the wooden doors half broken, but inside it was cool and still. He decided they would rest there for the night. As the woman walked through the empty chapel, she saw faint carvings on the wall's crosses, prayers, words faded by time. She wondered how many souls had sought refuge here before them. How many prayers had gone unanswered. The warrior sat by the doorway, sharpening his knife. His expression was distant, his eyes fixed on the horizon where the last light was fading. She asked if he believed they would find peace someday. He didn't answer immediately. When he finally spoke, he said peace was a gift only the brave could earn, and most men were too afraid to seek it. She didn't understand all he meant, but his words stayed with her. That night thunder rolled in the distance. A storm was coming, and with it, the scent of rain and danger. The woman couldn't sleep. She watched the lightning flash across the sky through the cracked roof, thinking of the home she had lost, the people she might never see again. Then she looked at the man sitting near the fire, his face calm despite the storm. She wondered what it must feel like to live between two worlds, to belong to neither, yet carry the spirit of both. When the rain came, it fell hard and sudden, drumming against the broken walls. The warrior stood outside, letting the water wash over him. She watched him through the doorway, the firelight behind her flickering like a heartbeat. In that moment, he seemed carved from the land itself, strong, wild, untamed, yet bound by something deeper than pride. But as the rain poured, he heard it the distant beat of horses. He froze, every muscle tense. The woman saw the change in his eyes and knew something was wrong. The riders were close. His tribe had found the trail again. He motioned for her to stay quiet, his hand tightening around the knife. The rain muffled the sound for a while, but the echo of hooves grew clearer. Closer. She reached for his arm, her fear rising. He looked at her, his eyes steady and calm, though his heart raced beneath the surface. He knew they couldn't fight them all. Not here, not now. They would have to run again. He packed quickly water, dried meat, the few belongings they had gathered, and led her toward the back of the mission, where the old stone wall had crumbled enough for them to slip through. The rain had turned the ground to mud, masking their tracks. It was their only chance. As they moved into the dark, the woman glanced back one last time. Lightning lit the broken chapel, and for an instant, she thought she saw shadows, men on horseback, spears raised, searching. Her pulse quickened, and she gripped the warrior's arm tighter. They moved silently into the storm, their breath heavy, their hearts pounding. The night swallowed them, and the desert once again became their only refuge. The warrior knew the chase was far from over. His people were not just after vengeance, they wanted to reclaim him, to remind him where he belonged. But his heart was no longer in one place. It was now divided between the blood of his ancestors and the fragile life he had chosen to protect. And as the thunder rolled across the horizon, he realized something he could not yet say aloud, that the battle waiting ahead was not only against his tribe, but against the fate that bound them both to this unforgiving land. The desert, vast and eternal, watched in silence as the two fugitives disappeared into the rain, carrying with them a story not yet written but already burning in the wind. By dawn, the storm had moved east, leaving the world washed clean and cold. The warrior led the woman through a narrow cut in the rocks where the ground held fresh puddles and the scent of sage. He stepped lightly, reading the earth for sign, pausing often to listen. She studied his face when he looked away. The same strength that had lifted her from the dirt now seemed heavier, as if a decision he had not spoken was pressing down on his shoulders. She wanted to ask what it cost him to help her, but the wind carried distant sounds that kept words small. The chase had not ended. It had only changed shape. They reached a ridge where the desert opened into a plain of scrub and pale grass. Far to the south lay a line of cottonwoods marking a dry riverbed, and beyond that, a trading post where the warrior had once brought ponies and hides. He did not say its name. He only said there might be food, medicine, and news. The woman nodded. Her body was stronger now, though pain still traveled with her like a quiet shadow. She tucked the small pendant into her dress, as if to hide a private fire. He had noticed the pendant before, but never pressed her about it. Some truths found their own time. As they moved, the story of the land unfolded in pieces. He spoke of a spring in the hills where his people gathered in summer, of a place where the red cliffs held paintings older than memory, of a burial ground where the wind never rested. His words were not lessons. They were a way of saying where his heart lived. She told him in turn about the wagon train, the long nights, the faces around the fire. There had been a man among them who called himself a guide. He had promised safe passage, then vanished on the second week, leaving tension like a knot that tightened each day. When the raiders came, confusion swallowed sense. She remembered the smell of smoke and the flashing of torches. She could not say who led the attack. She only remembered a voice telling her she had brought it, and the whip that followed. The warrior kept those details close in his mind. A guide who vanished. A raid that felt like more than rage. He had seen such tricks near the trading post, where a clever hand could turn to angry groups against each other while he counted his profit. If there had been betrayal, it might be waiting for them at that post. Dressed like kindness, near midday they passed a bleached skull half buried in grass. The woman tried not to look, but the warrior studied the ground around it. He pointed to prints leading away, older than the rain, then to a set of hoof marks, newer and careless. He said, riders had moved through in a hurry, not as people. The shoes were iron. He tasted the air and faced north where the plain lifted into broken hills. His people would circle wide, watching. Others might ride straight, expecting to find two fugitives on exhausted mounts. He chose the hills. They climbed until the ground dropped into a bowl ringed with pinyon and rock. He found a ledge that overlooked the plain and crouched in the shade. From there he could see almost to the cottonwoods. He handed the woman a strip of dried meat and told her to rest while he scanned the world with patient eyes. Time moved slowly. A hawk turned above them, dipping its wings to the shifting air. The woman ate, then took small gulps of water, careful not to waste. She felt the ache of hunger soften, and with it her thoughts wandered to the last morning with her family. She had teased her younger brother about the way he tied the lead rope. She had pressed her forehead to her mother's and promised the new land would feel like home. The memory seated itself heavy in her chest. She had no way to know if any of them lived. The warrior sensed the shift in her breathing and looked over. He did not ask. He simply passed her the blanket and returned to watching the plain. Near dusk, the first subplot of their trouble appeared, riding from the direction of the trading post. 3 men, hats pulled low, coats snapping in the evening wind. They did not ride like a patrol. They moved like men who were sure of their purpose and did not expect to be delayed. The warrior studied them a long time. He said they carried long guns wrapped in cloth and moved with the routine of men who worked together often. The woman squinted until her eyes watered. She could not tell who they were. The warrior folded one corner of the blanket around her shoulders and said they should sleep in turns. He would keep the first watch. While she slept, he listened to the desert, counting heartbeats between small sounds, measuring the distance of each. He thought of the council fire he had left behind, the elder who had told him a man is the path he chooses, not the name he carries. He had chosen, yet doubt lived like a thorn under his skin. Would the elders see compassion or betrayal? Would the young warriors who had laughed beside him return with hard eyes and spears raised? He breathed slow until doubt settled into silence. Before dawn he woke the woman, and they moved on. As the plain narrowed toward the cottonwoods, new thread tightened the main conflict. In the shade of the trees they found the tracks of a wagon with a broken wheel, dragged a short way and abandoned. Near it lay the ashes of a small cook fire and the mark of a boot heel dug deep, as if someone had stamped the earth in anger. The woman's hand shook. She touched a scrap of cloth snagged on a thorn and pressed it to her lips. It was from a dress she knew. He looked to the ground again and read a story in the dust. A smaller set of prints had moved away from the wagon to carrying loads, one limping. The trail angled toward the post. He told her softly that some from her party might still be alive. She closed her eyes and nodded. Hope was a fragile thing, but it warmed like a coal. They followed the dry riverbed until the trading post rose from the heat like a low fort of timber and adobe. Smoke drifted from a chimney. Voices crossed the yard. The warrior stopped them on the far side of a tangle of mesquite. He said they would watch before stepping closer. The woman agreed. From cover they saw men going in and out with rifles on their shoulders, 2 wagons hitched as if ready to roll on short notice. A boy led a mule with sacks slung across its back. At the well, a thin man filled a bucket and laughed with someone the woman could not see. Then she saw him. The guide who had vanished weeks before. He stood on the porch leaning against a post like he had never done wrong in his life. Her stomach knotted. The warrior did not move. He measured the faces around the guide, fixing their patterns in memory. The guide spoke to a heavy-set trader with a scar near his ear. The trader's eyes were sharp, never resting on one thing for long. The warrior watched money pass between them. He watched the guide point south, then north, then slap the trading post wall with the flat of his hand like he was explaining the shape of the world. The trader nodded slowly and sent the boy off on the mule. The woman whispered that she wanted to go in, to ask about her people. The warrior placed a steady hand on hers and said not yet. He would go first as a horse seller asking for grain. She must stay hidden. She hated the idea of being left, but she knew he was right. If the guide saw her, questions would turn to knives. He rode out from the mesquite with a calm that looked like easy patience, but was built from caution. At the gate, he dismounted and tied his horse to the rail. The men on the porch watched him with the flat eyes of gamblers. He greeted the trader without bowing. He asked for grain and a little salt. The trader smiled like a man who liked to see how much a thing could cost. He fetched a sack, asked where the warrior had been hunting, asked if the hills were dry. The warrior answered with short truths that said nothing. He kept his face quiet while he studied the yard. In the shadow of a shed, he saw a pair of boots with a delicate heel. A woman's boots? One toe turned inward, the way his eyes had read in the dust. He caught the trader's gaze and felt the hook of it. The man was used to pulling secrets. On the porch, the guide turned and looked straight at the warrior, then looked away with a shrug. That act told more than any greeting. Men who do wrong pretend not to see what might recognize them. The warrior paid for the grain and salt with a piece of silver and a coil of rawhide rope. The trader weighed them both with his palm and nodded approval. As the warrior untied his horse, a voice rose from the shed, soft and hurried. He could not make out the words, only the shape of fear. He tightened the cinch and rode out at an even pace, not breaking the rhythm that kept men from shooting out of habit. The woman hurried from cover when he returned and asked what he saw. He told her about the boots, the voice, the guide working like a hand for the trader. He said the post smelled of lies and hurried plans. Her jaw trembled, but did not break. She said if those were her people, they needed help. He agreed and laid out his thought in steady lines. If they rushed in, guns would do the talking. If they found proof of trade with raiders, the post could be the root of the attack on the wagon train. He would circle at dusk, climb to the roof from the corral side, and learn what he could. She would wait near the mesquite with the horses and run if she heard a certain call. Before dusk, another group arrived from the north. 5 riders, faces painted with ash and red clay. The warrior's breath stalled, then steadied. These were his people, not the hunters who had chased them, but a scouting band led by a man he knew as a cousin by marriage. They dismounted with the quiet of practiced men and walked straight to the trader, ignoring the guide. They spoke in a low voice behind the well. The trader opened a small chest and showed them wrapped objects. The warrior could not see what, but he knew the ritual of bargaining when weapons were near. What tightened his chest was not the goods. It was the way the trader pointed toward the hills and then toward the mesquite, as if selling more than grain. The cousin nodded once, expression blank, and the band returned to their horses. The warrior's plan tilted. If his people and the trader were trading more than tools, the path into the post would be more dangerous than he had measured. He told the woman to move farther west, where a broken fence met the dry river. If he did not return by moonrise, she must ride for the cottonwoods and hide until first light. She shook her head and said she would wait, but he pressed her hand until she agreed, even if the promise tasted of ash. Night gathered while a thin breeze ran along the ground. From the corral side, he climbed a ladder left against a wall and eased onto the flat roof. Through a gap, he heard voices below. The guide was telling the trader that the lost settlers could fetch a price if delivered safe to the fort, or a better price if captured by men who wrote laws with their mouths and ignored them with their hands. The trader chuckled and said the law paid slow. Then another voice spoke, one the warrior knew from winter ceremonies. The cousin said the band wanted rifles and salt, and they would deliver the warrior who had betrayed the council and the woman he protected. He added that 2 of the surviving settlers were being held out back until a decision was made at dawn. The traitor asked for a promise sealed by a token. Metal clinked. The cousin swore by the bones of his father. The guide swore by a name that was not his own. On the roof, the warrior closed his eyes. In the space between two breaths, he saw the old world and the new, climbing onto the same cart, each with a hand on the reins. He thought of the burial ground where the wind never rested, and of the woman waiting by the broken fence with both fear and hope. Wrapped in the same small chest, he could not fight a post and a scouting band and a coil of greed with only a knife and a good horse. He needed another road, one that broke bargains without spilling the blood he had tried. So hard to keep from the sand, he slid back from the gap and froze at the scrape of a boot. A boy stood at the corner of the roof holding a lantern low. It was the mule boy from the well. His face was thin and his eyes too old for his years. He looked at the warrior, then at the mesquite, where the horses waited. He whispered that the traitor had promised him freedom if he kept quiet about the prisoners in the shed. But freedom did not sound like the traitor when doors were locked from the outside. The warrior asked him what he wanted. The boy said a way out and water for his mother, who slept behind the kitchen with a fever. The warrior said if the boy would distract the man at the corral with a loose mule, he would see the door changed from locked to open. The boy nodded once and slipped away like a moth's shadow. The warrior moved along the roof and dropped into the dark at the edge of the yard. At the shed door, he felt the iron latch, old and stubborn. Inside, a woman coughed, then whispered a name. He answered softly that help was near and to be ready. Hooves clattered at the corral as the mule boy began to swear and shout. Men ran past the shed, one laughing at the boy's trouble. The warrior lifted the latch with a wedge of wood until it gave. He opened the door the width of a hand and saw two faces, ash pale but fierce. The woman in the back had the inward-turned foot. She clutched a small bundle. He told them to wait for his call and to follow the shadow of the fence until the mesquite covered them. Then the yard erupted with noise as the mule kicked a rail free and a horse screamed. He pulled the door wide, and the captives slipped out into the darkness, moving like ghosts. At the corner of the shed, the guide stepped into the light with a rifle. He had seen the door swing. For a breath, the world held its position. The guide raised the rifle. The warrior reached for the knife. A voice from the porch called for light, and the traitor lifted the lantern high, its glow spilling across the yard like a throw net. Beyond the mesquite, a horse nickered softly. The woman waiting there felt the tension snap like a wire. She set her foot in the stirrup, ready to ride. Ready to shout the call that would bring the warrior running, even if it brought the whole post down upon them. The boy's lantern bobbed in the chaos. The cousin and his men turned sharply, hands to their belts, eyes hard as flint. The wind rose, carrying the smell of rain that had not yet arrived. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote began to sing, and the sound lay thin across the night as all the pieces rushed toward each other, not yet touching, but close enough to feel the heat. The traitor's lantern wavered in the wind, throwing shadows across the yard that twisted like restless spirits. The warrior stood still, the knife hidden against his wrist, his eyes fixed on the man with the rifle. The woman and the captives were somewhere beyond the mesquite, waiting for his signal. He could hear the mules stamping, the boy shouting for help, and the low rumble of thunder rolling in from the south. The night was alive with danger, and with the promise that one wrong move would shatter everything. The guide's finger twitched on the trigger. The warrior's muscles coiled like a bowstring, every breath a silent calculation. Behind the guide, the cousin stepped out from the porch, his expression unreadable, though his eyes glimmered with recognition. The traitor's voice cut through the tension, smooth and sharp. He demanded to know what was happening, who had opened the shed, and why the mule boy had gone wild. The warrior knew he had seconds, not minutes. He shifted his stance just as lightning flashed, blinding the yard in white. In that flash, he moved. The knife struck the rifle barrel, knocking it aside. The guide stumbled back with a cry, and the shot fired harmlessly into the air. Chaos exploded. The mule reared. The boy darted into the shadows, and men came rushing from the house, shouting over one another. The warrior turned, snatched the guide's shoulder, and threw him into the mud. The cousin drew his weapon, but for a brief second their eyes met two men of the same blood, torn between duty and heart. The cousin hesitated. That hesitation was all the warrior needed. He leaped for the fence and whistled, a sharp sound that sliced through the storm's wind. From the darkness beyond the post, horses answered. The woman had heard him. The freed captives followed her lead, riding hard toward the cottonwoods. The warrior ran, the sound of hooves thundering behind him, shouts rising as torches flared to life. Bullets cracked in the night, some hitting wood, others slicing through air. He reached the gate, grabbed the rail, and swung himself over just as a torch struck the fence and caught fire. The heat licked his arm, but he didn't stop. The woman saw him break from the smoke and pushed her horse forward. Her heart pounded as she reached down, extending her hand. The warrior caught it and vaulted up behind her, landing hard. He grabbed the reins and spurred the horse into the open plain. Rain began to fall again, thick and heavy, as if the sky itself wanted to hide them. Behind, the trader's men mounted and gave chase. Their shouts fading and rising with the wind, they rode through the darkness, the freed settlers close behind. The cousin's riders joined the pursuit from the ridge, drawn by pride and obligation. The desert became a storm of hooves and rain and shouts, flashes of lightning revealing faces twisted with fury and resolve. The woman clung to the saddle, her hair plastered to her face, her body shaking with exhaustion. The warrior could feel her trembling, but her grip never loosened. She was no longer the fragile captive he had found in the sand. She was surviving beside him. They reached the riverbed, now half filled with storm water. The current roared, but it was their only path. The warrior turned to the settlers and shouted for them to cross downstream, to follow the bend where the water ran shallow. He knew this land. He knew its traps and its shelters. The woman turned her head, catching the faint light from his face. There was no fear in his eyes, only fierce determination. When they plunged into the river, cold water surged against their legs. The horse stumbled once but found footing. The woman gasped, clinging to his arm. Behind them, torches appeared at the ridge. The cousin's band had not given up. The warrior guided their horse along the current, forcing the trail to vanish beneath water and mud. The storm masked their scent, but luck could only last so long. When they reached the far bank, he urged the others into the trees. They followed without question. Under the thick canopy of mesquite and pine, they slowed. The woman coughed, her voice raw. The captives, one older man and the limping woman, thanked the warrior in trembling words. He nodded but said nothing, scanning the darkness behind them. The older man told him of the ambush at the wagon train, of how the guide had sold them to raiders and left the survivors to be traded like goods. The warrior's jaw tightened. It confirmed what he had already suspected, that greed had brought this violence. Not loyalty, not justice. The woman turned to him and asked what would happen now. He said the pursuers would follow the trail until dawn. Then the cousin would realize he was chasing more than one kind of ghost. His tribe's honor was bound by pride, but pride could be turned to reason if the right truth reached their ears. He had no plan yet, only instinct and a heart that refused to surrender to hatred. They made camp in a hollow where the trees grew thick. The rain eased into a steady drizzle. The fire they built was small, hidden beneath a rock overhang. The woman sat close, her blanket wrapped tight, watching him mend a cut on his arm with quiet precision. Every movement he made seemed measured, controlled, but when his hand trembled slightly from pain, she reached out and steadied it. He looked at her, surprised by her touch, and something unspoken passed between them, trust born in the middle of chaos. Later, when the others slept, she asked him what he would do if his tribe caught them. He answered honestly. He said he would face them and speak his truth, even if it meant standing alone. He believed there was still honor and compassion, though many had forgotten it. She listened, her eyes glistening in the firelight. She told him she once believed survival meant hardening the heart, but now she wasn't sure. Maybe survival meant remembering how to care, even when the world turned cruel. Before dawn, a sound stirred him awake, the soft crack of a twig followed by silence. He motioned for her to stay still and crept toward the trees. Through the gray mist, he saw a figure on horseback, his cousin, alone. The warrior stepped forward slowly, his knife ready, but his voice calm. The cousin dismounted, his face shadowed by the first light. They stood a few yards apart, rain dripping from their hair. The cousin spoke first. He said the tribe was divided. Some wanted the warrior brought back in chains. Others said he had only followed the spirit of the ancestors. He had come alone not to fight, but to hear why the warrior had done what he did. The warrior told him about the woman, about the cruelty she had faced, and about the traitors who used both tribes and settlers for their own gain. He said if their people continued to fight everyone who was not like them, there would be no one left to defend their land when the real enemies came. The cousin's eyes softened, though his jaw remained hard. He said the council would not listen to such words easily. The warrior answered that he didn't need them to listen now. He only needed time. The cousin looked past him to the woman and the settlers, huddled in the trees. For a moment, the warrior thought he would call out the others. Instead, the cousin turned his horse and said he would give them 1 day's grace. After that, he could no longer stand between him and the tribe. As the cousin rode away, the warrior stood still, the weight of both hope and despair pressing down on him. The woman came to his side and whispered that he had a friend among his people. He nodded, though he knew friendship in such times was as fragile as the morning mist. The group moved again, heading toward the canyon trails that led deeper into the mountains. The land grew rougher, the air cooler. Along the way, the older man's strength began to fade, and the limping woman's steps slowed. The warrior helped them as best he could, carrying their packs, finding herbs for pain. The woman walked beside him in silence, her mind torn between fear and something deeper, something she didn't dare name. By the time the sun broke through the clouds, they had reached a narrow pass overlooking a valley. It was a place the warrior remembered from childhood, a hidden meadow where wild horses roamed. From here they could rest and decide what came next. The woman looked down at the open land below and smiled faintly. It felt like freedom, though she knew it was temporary. The warrior's eyes stayed fixed on the horizon. Somewhere beyond those ridges, his tribe was gathering. He could feel it in his blood. The tension rose like the heat off the desert floor. Every sound, the rustle of leaves, the cry of a distant hawk felt sharper. The woman sensed it too. She stayed close to him, her heart tight with worry. He told her if anything happened, she must ride north with the others and not look back. She wanted to argue but saw the resolve in his face and stopped herself. That night, the wind changed. The warrior looked up from the fire and saw faint lights moving along the ridge torches. His cousin's grace had ended. The tribe had come, not as a scouting party, but as a force. He could see their banners faintly, black against the stars. The woman caught his arm, her voice barely a whisper.
Asking what they would do?
He stood slowly, his shadow long in the firelight. His gaze was steady, though his heart beat fast. He told her they would not run this time. He had carried her from death once, and he would carry her again if he must but tonight. Would also face his people and the truth that bound them. The storm that had chased them across the desert was now inside them both, ready to break as the sound of drums echoed faintly through the valley. The warrior walked to the edge of the ridge, his hair whipping in the wind. Below, his tribe moved like ghosts through the dark. The woman followed a few steps behind, her eyes wide, her voice trembling as she called his name. He didn't turn. The desert around them held its breath, waiting for what would come next, the final reckoning between loyalty, love, and the freedom that could only be won when both were tested by fire. The night was alive with sound and firelight. Drums echoed from the valley, and the warrior's tribe gathered below, their torches flickering like a river of stars. The woman stood near the campfire, her heart pounding as she watched him walk down the slope toward his people. The air was heavy with tension and unspoken words, but his steps never faltered. He had carried her across deserts, fought men who wanted her dead, and defied the laws of his own people. Now he would face them not as an outcast, but as a man standing for what he believed was right. The tribe's warriors formed a semicircle as he approached. Their faces were painted, their expressions unreadable in the shifting light. At the center stood the elder, a man with silver hair and eyes that had seen too many winters. Beside him stood the cousin, who had once sworn to bring the warrior back in chains. The elder raised his hand for silence. The sound of drums faded until only the crackling of torches filled the air. The warrior stopped a few paces away and bowed his head in respect. When he looked up, his voice carried clearly through the night. He told them everything. He spoke of the traders who played both sides for profit, of the settlers who suffered as much as they did, and of the cruelty he had witnessed. He said the woman had not come to steal or to harm, but to survive, and that saving her had not been a betrayal of their tribe, it had been a defense of their humanity. For a long time, no one spoke. The wind moved softly through the canyon, lifting ashes from the torches. Then one of the younger warriors stepped forward, his tone sharp with anger. He asked if compassion was now greater than loyalty. The warrior met his gaze and said that true loyalty was not blind. It was the courage to protect what was sacred in all living things. His words struck something deep, though not everyone would admit it. The elder's eyes softened. He asked the woman to step forward. She hesitated, but the warrior motioned gently for her to join him. The tribe watched in silence as she approached, her hands trembling, her face pale but steady. She didn't know their language, yet her presence spoke louder than words. When she reached his side, she placed her hand over his heart. That small gesture told the tribe what no speech could. The elder turned to the cousin and spoke quietly in their tongue. After a moment, the cousin nodded. The elder then faced the warrior again and said he had broken custom, but not spirit. His actions had been reckless, but they had come from honor, not deceit. The tribe would not punish him. Instead, they would hear his truth and seek proof of it. He would be allowed to lead them to the trader's post to uncover the lies that had fueled so much hatred. Relief flooded through the warrior. Though he kept his expression calm, the woman felt her breath catch, realizing that the storm was beginning to pass. The tribe would not harm them. For the first time since she had met him, she saw the tension leave his shoulders. At dawn, they rode together, warriors, settlers, and the woman, all heading toward the trading post. The air was cool and clear, the desert glowing under the morning sun. When they arrived, the traders' men tried to flee, but the tribe surrounded them swiftly. The guide who had betrayed the wagon train was dragged out from hiding, his lies collapsing under the weight of truth. The elder listened as both sides spoke. The settlers told their story. The boy from the post confessed. And even the cousin saw the proof. Greed had played them all against each other. By afternoon, the trading post stood empty. The stolen goods were returned, and the guilty men were sent away under guard. There was no need for more blood. Justice came not from revenge, but from the quiet understanding that a wrong exposed was stronger than a wrong avenged. The warrior looked at the woman standing in the sunlight, her face calm for the first time in many days. He knew that every risk had been worth it. That evening, the tribe shared their fire with the settlers. They sat together in uneasy peace, passing food, speaking in gestures when words failed. The elder watched them and said softly that perhaps the Great Spirit had chosen this path not for punishment but for change. He turned to the warrior and told him that compassion could be a weapon as strong as any blade if used with wisdom. Later, when the sky turned violet and the stars began to appear, the warrior walked away from the fire and stood at the edge of the canyon. The woman joined him quietly. They watched the last light fade across the horizon. She told him she never thought she'd live to see another dawn. He answered that life often began again when all seemed lost. She smiled faintly and said that maybe fate had brought her to the desert not to die, but to find him. He looked at her, the firelight glinting in his eyes. He said fate had strange ways, and sometimes it tested hearts to see what they were truly made of. She reached for his hand, and for the first time, he didn't pull away. The warmth of her touch felt like a promise, fragile but real. In the days that followed, the settlers began rebuilding their wagons. The tribe helped them find safe passage through the canyons, away from danger. The woman stayed near the warrior's camp, helping where she could, tending the injured, sharing stories through smiles and gestures. The children of the tribe grew fond of her, following her around and laughing at her attempts to speak their language. In return, She taught them songs from her homeland, soft tunes that carried across the open plain like whispers of hope. The warrior's cousin visited often, though they rarely spoke of what had passed. There was a quiet understanding between them now, a respect earned through struggle. The elder watched the changes with calm satisfaction. The world was shifting, he said, and maybe it was time to stop fighting the inevitable wind and start walking with it. Weeks later, when the settlers were ready to move on, the woman faced a choice. She could return to her people, continue west, and leave behind the world that had nearly destroyed her, or she could stay. The decision weighed heavy on her, though her heart already knew the answer. One evening, she found the warrior by the river, watching the water move beneath the fading sun. She told him she was tired of running, tired of fearing what tomorrow might bring. She wanted to live where kindness was not weakness, and courage was not born from hate. He listened silently, then smiled in that rare, quiet way of his, and said the desert had room for all who carried an honest heart. In the following weeks their lives settled into rhythm. She learned his language little by little, and he learned hers. They worked side by side, gathering herbs, tending the horses, helping his people rebuild what had been lost. Their connection grew not from grand words, but from the simple trust of shared days. She no longer felt like a stranger. He no longer felt alone. As summer turned to fall, the desert bloomed after a rare rain. Wildflowers painted the ground with color, and the air carried the scent of life returning. The elder called for a gathering at the sacred spring, a celebration of peace between the tribe and the settlers. The warrior and the woman stood together among the crowd, the warmth of the fire reflecting in their eyes. When the drums began to play, she smiled, and for the first time he reached for her hand openly before everyone. No one looked away or spoke against it. The tribe had seen what their bond had brought, not shame, but healing. That night, as the stars stretched endlessly above them, the woman rested her head on his shoulder and whispered that she finally understood what freedom truly meant. It wasn't in running or fighting, it was in choosing love over fear. The warrior wrapped his arm around her and looked at the horizon where the land met the sky. He said the desert had witnessed their pain, but now it would carry their story, the story of a man who defied his tribe and a woman who found strength in mercy. By morning, the wagon trains moved on, the tribe returned to their camps, and the world began again. But somewhere in that vast wilderness, two hearts beat as one, living proof that compassion could bridge even the widest divide.
Ow.
The desert that had once been a place of suffering now stood as a home, a quiet, endless sea of freedom and forgiveness. And when the wind swept across the plains, carrying the scent of rain and the echo of drums, it also carried their story, a reminder that courage is not only found in battle, but in the choice to save another soul, even when the world says not to. Their names may have faded with time, but their legacy lived on in every whisper of the land, in every fire that burned against the night, and in every heart that still believed love could outlast the storm.